Well, let's make a formal start then. So I'll address the camera and to our huge crowd this evening because everyone started going on holiday. So so it's really good actually to be able to do this. It won't be necessarily as smooth as some of the other things that we've done because this is the first time with a kind of half-done presentation and translation that I'm still kind of getting my head around. So there'll be things I'm sure I forget as we go through and stuff that needs to be added to it. But it is actually, I'm really encouraged, and I have to say a massive thank you to Anne, who's operating the cameras tonight. Because her and her husband Alistair have done a huge amount on the engineering side of what we're going to be doing, and creating the bits of equipment that we're going to put together. We're going to build a model of the tabernacle, but using a very different approach. But what my hope is, as you see this evening, is we're basically going to run through the text. But it's a translation I've done for the presentation on Saturday. Now you say translation, what does that mean? Well, obviously I've used foundational ones. I used the King James because the King James set the tone for everything else, and then I mix that with the World English Bible. But as we're going to see, part of the problem is that there's a very big inconsistency in the way Hebrew words are being translated in the English text. And part of the reason there's so much inconsistency is because the people were trying to take what's quite complicated technical detail and fit it to a model which fundamentally, I think by the end of this evening, hopefully you'll see it probably is just wrong. The reason it's probably just wrong is simply because actually the circular tabernacle falls out so naturally once you've translated the kind of particular words correctly. So as we'll come to it later this evening, but just kind of getting the flow going. I think I actually came across while I was doing this translation one word where the word side appears several times in the same verse, and there are three different words being translated all as side right the way through that kind of context. And then there are times when a Hebrew phrase which is fine cord is translated as linen, and other times where it's translated as being more like wool. Things like this kind of complexity. So there's a lot of work done for Saturday, and this is the first time we'll have had a chance to present it. I only finished doing it last night. It will no doubt have mistakes in it. It will need to be corrected over time. But I've tried to use specific unique words for all of the different Hebrew words underlying it. Occasionally there are times as well where a Hebrew word has to be translated one of two different ways depending on context. That's standard when you speak in a language. But hopefully none of it will be too confusing, and it will all kind of fall out and look good. So, oh yes, I was going to say this was supposed to be our first shot, the first screen, and the little kind of cutaway image is from a traditional model of the tabernacle, and as I put in the second one, that traditional model is made up of kind of 5 layers to start with. So just kind of getting our head around. The tabernacle is so kind of key because at the heart of it is the house in which God's presence dwells. But it's important to notice that you don't have to build the house and then God's presence turns up, because obviously in the terms of the story of Israel, God's presence has been with them, but actually it is a part of their worship to create an adequate space for him. And I always think it's worth highlighting that, because occasionally as you read kind of some of the kind of literature and commentary around these things, it's almost like if you don't get the tabernacle right, God won't turn up, if I can put it that way. Whereas actually it's so often it's like the point that Paul makes about that grace comes before circumcision, for instance. God has made a covenant with Abraham before he's given him circumcision. You don't have to get the law all right before God's grace is already working and doing stuff with you. And so there is I want to kind of put it into that context, that God's presence has been with them. It's led them through the Red Sea, it's travelled with them. It takes them time to build the thing, but it's an adequate response, if you like. It's God has acted and man has reacted to try and give him something, but God has given them gives them a design. And what's really interesting, as we'll see tonight, is when we see how naturally the circular design fits together, you kind of realise how there's so much technical knowledge represented in the shape of the tabernacle, which the model we're looking at the moment that's on the screen, the square one, just doesn't have. It can look very scenic, but until you stop and you think about it from a kind of structural point of view. So as I said, it in kind of its basic shape, it's made up of 5 layers. So you've got this wooden panels in the cutaway Those are represented by kind of wooden posts. It's got multi-layered linen over them. It's then got a goat hair layer, just sitting right on top of the linen layer. There's nothing separating them. And then nothing again separating. Then there's a red layer of leather, and then there's a brown layer of leather. So we get 5 kind of layers, and so people have often talked about the typology of the different things, but you have to ask the question with them all sitting on top of each other, and it kind of does raise a few problems. So if I just kind of highlight some of the problems that you get with the sort of square tabernacle. Right, for me, which is quite an important one, and I haven't actually put the verse reference in here, I can't tell you, but most of you will recognise it when I say it. But Leviticus, which of course is written at the same time as the tabernacle is being built, so it's coming about at the same time, explicitly forbids the mixing of linen and wool together. And yet here we have a model where the two are totally sitting on top of each other. So there's a kind of it's odd. It may be that God's doing, and people say, well, it's God's special house, so He's allowed it and nobody else is. But it's odd that there's nothing in the text that says this is why I've got it and that's why you're not supposed to have it, if that makes sense. So we just have, so there's linen and there's a wool layer that gets mixed. This model here, you can see there are gaps between the boards, but actually the dimensions that are given for the boards, which we'll look at in more detail in a minute, don't actually allow for any gaps if you want to get the tabernacle kind of covered. So everything has to just kind of, so there are no gaps. Now the reason they probably put those gaps in is because people want to be able to see the fine embroidered linen, which has got cherubim embroidered on it, and it's the work of a fine craftsman. But the strange thing is, in the standard model, those boards obscure it from the inside, so you can't see the fine weaving from the inside, and from the outside it's covered by 3 layers: a wool layer, a leather layer, and a red leather layer, and a brown leather layer. So it just kind of adds a strange kind of question. There's an excess, that's the little blue one, there's an excess of fabric at the back. At the sides, you'll notice, if you look very, very carefully, that the blue layer doesn't quite reach the floor. You can see it on both sides of the tabernacle. So the wool layer doesn't quite reach the floor, but the wool layer does, just makes the floor. But at the so over the, if you like, running across the top of the tabernacle, things aren't quite long enough to kind of reach the ground. But at the back, there's piles of the stuff. It's just what happens if you put a big square over it. It's like if you put a square piece over a square box. You fold it down, you have to do something with the flaps, when you're folding a presents. So actually we need to kind of do that. And it's interesting because there is a point where it tells us what to do with some of the excess flaps, but not at this point. So it tells us it tells us about the folding of a final panel and folding it backwards on itself and so on. But it doesn't make any reference to kind of folds or anything that's needed to deal with the excess fabric at the back. So some models will kind of show you a kind of a sloping back to kind of and spreading out so it kind of gets wider and so on. That's because those people are just saying, well, it must have gone somewhere and we don't want it just hanging down and so on. So that they may seem rather trivial. The orange one at the bottom is one of those things that gets a little bit more serious, but isn't so obvious and easy to see. Which is that this model here, at the very bottom, there are kind of bases or feet for the upright pillars, or not pillars, what we call them, the boards. They're actually normally is the way they're translated. And this whole tabernacle, which is made with 3 solid sides, and you'll notice there are some beams that run through to connect them together in this model, so that they kind of stand up, but they freestand around three sides. And if you ever try to do that with a significant weight, it sounds nice, but actually they fall in very quickly. And not only that, but at the front where you have nothing to brace across the top, you have quite a lot of weight of fabric kind of dragging in. And so part of the way that's compensated for is because it talks about silver settings, and so those are assumed to be enormous, really, to create a huge amount of weight at the base. The problem is that they end up with a greater volume of silver than is actually specified. So there's we haven't got time to look at all of that tonight, because we're just going to build the things. At this stage, I'm just kind of highlighting some of the problems with the current model. And then on top of that, you've got a number of other things. So there's an overall stability, which is very poor, and construction requires a total level playing field, a total level floor. I'm saying that quickly here. It becomes more apparent when you stop and you think about little things like, you see those poles that run through rings on the sides of the poles. Those rings aren't actually specified. So some models you'll see, instead of going, they're not metal rings on the side, they're kind of just drilled straight through the poles. But actually, if you want to try and line up 20 poles or 20 planks, and then run a straight line all the way through them and stand them on uneven ground, it's just really, really complicated to do. It sounds so trivial if you're playing around with Lego size, but unless you've got a nice totally flat surface, there's going to be little bumps and things aren't going to quite stand, so on. And so to get something through all of those is actually quite complicated. So very often, sorry, again, I'm just saying, what then happens is people say, well, the holes are quite big, so there's a lot of flexibility. But if there's a lot of flexibility, then actually the poles stop being useful for what they're there for, which is to kind of lock them into place to stop them wobbling around and try and create stability. You get what I'm driving at, I suppose. Oops, hello. Something's gone funny with my. Okay, that's better. Touching damp layers breed mold, or is that bread mold? Sorry. And that's typically the kind of thing I do like to mistake I make. Touching that, yeah. So obviously you've got layers on top of each other. Well, as they get damp, and actually strangely, you have what potentially are two waterproof layers in the leather layers on the outside. But of course that traps moisture in. And if anyone's kind of camped in old style tents with multiple layers, we used to set one up as kids. We had a real old one. We used to set one up in the garden and kind of live in it for most of the summer. And then by the end of the summer, when you're taking it down, it has great patches of mould from all the damp and the rain that's got into the layers and where the things have touched and so on. And so that is just which of course, again, if you read in Leviticus, is something that actually you're supposed to take outside the camp and burn it and destroy it. So it's a kind of an odd thing to have created a structure that actually wants to encourage that, unless of course it's a supernatural protection of the thing that stops it happening, which is always possible. Inside, of course, you're inside 5 layers in temperatures of around 40 degrees during summer, and you're burning incense the whole time. So first of all, you're depleting oxygen because there's no ventilation, and the heavy oily smoke from the lamp is going to start staining the inside surfaces. Anyone that's kind of just kept normal candles kind of under a lowish ceiling, you see that sort of thing happening. And this isn't little candles, this is a great big heavy oil burning lamp. So you've got all these kind of things which when you look at them, it can look wonderful from a picture, lovely colours on that, if I can put that. But when you stop and you think about it, it gets complicated. And part of the problem is that on the theological side, people have ignored the technical dimensions and the technical weaknesses. Just said, but look, we love the cherubim, and they talk about prayer because that's what cherubim do speak about. It comes from a word, it seems, in Arabia that means intercession, cherubim. So they're kind of intercessory angels. So we love that. Even if you can't see them, we know they're there. That's the thing. So that's great from a theological point of view. But just from the practical, pragmatic, technical, for the critics, you look at it and say, well, it was just kind of something that people made up in a rather arbitrary way because it's very difficult to make work. And although you can go and look at these models, because there's one in Israel, there's one somewhere in the States, they've often used modern kind of engineering type techniques to kind of just make the thing work by precision engineering, which is a little bit of a cheat. Although, of course, I have to say, it doesn't preclude the idea that they worked with divine precision, kind of without the technical tools. And of course, you can always take that view. It's always there. But anyway, let's actually look at. So if we're going to look at actually what the text tells us, because and it has been fascinating. I have to say, myself and Anne, in our different ways, we've been working on different approaches to try and understand what this guy's done, Andrew Hoy. And we ordered his book and been making the models, and I've been looking at the text. And so we've been having these kind of conversations with, how about this? How does that work? And at first it was really hard to see, just being really blunt. And then you suddenly see it, and then it clicks. But I'm recognising that was my experience. I kind of was enthusiastic with the idea when I first heard it, because we saw the pie the ratio pi in the circular tabernacle, that sounded great. But when you sat and tried to read it, and you said, well, how does that work? How does this work? And it's only been, as you kind of do it, it starts to, there's actually a flow and a logic, we'll see, even in the way that the text is organised, that kind of matches the building of this circular tabernacle. So we're going to look at Exodus 26 and 27 tonight, what I would hope to have done, but it's just there's a lot of detail and it's just all slowly going into the presentation, would be to put the King James Version with all of the kind of key words with their Strong's number. You'll see as we go through, occasionally I've got Strong's numbers in and so on. You have to use whatever your translation is to see how it describes what I've then made the translation into. But there is a kind of, through those two chapters, there is a kind of a nice, they're not all equal size, because a couple of them are quite small, perhaps I should, but you kind of got this flow. So it starts by describing the covering fabrics. So it describes them all, and the assumption we've made in the traditional model is that they just all kind of fit on top of each other, and that's because of the use of words like covering and over. But actually they're very often they're Hebrew prefixes which are slightly broader in their meaning. So for instance, the Hebrew word that means over can also mean around, in the same way that if I have an overcoat, I don't put it on my head, it actually surrounds me. It's the same, we do the same in English. Over can mean sort of two different things. So over and around, sometimes we have to distinguish the two. So there's a whole section though that kind of basically tells us what the covering fabrics are, how you join them together, and if there's anything that's specifically about joining the fabrics. So that's all kind of covered in the first section. And then the second section is then describing how to lay out the framework and the bits you need for the framework. And then in section 3, it's got some finishing touches, and then it has as a single verse. It says, and then you raise the tabernacle, because you've got the fabrics now, and you've got all the bits that you need, and now you raise it. Does that make sense? Once you've raised it, of course, then we've got to go and we put the internal features in, because now we've got it up. We need to put the stuff inside, and then once the last one should be external features, not internal features. Fifth point then. 27 onwards, we read about the external features, which we call the courtyard, the altar, and the gate. So there's a kind of a logical flow. The funny thing is, it's actually really hard to see, I think, just reading most English translations. You kind of lose yourself. It sounds like we're talking about fabrics again when we get to the outer courtyard. Well, of course you're talking about fabrics again when you get to the outer courtyard. In the traditional model, we actually create an extra layer. But actually there's no need, because we've already had the outer courtyard fabrics described in the first section. It's actually one of the layers that we have assumed, if I can put it that way, sits on top of the thing, and it's because we think it sits on top because the word says over. It doesn't say surrounding, which it could do. If it said surrounding, we would suddenly realise when we get to the last section that we're just now talking about the fabric that we had described for us. They told us how to lay it all out and do it. Now we're just putting it up. If that makes sense. We're putting it up on its posts. So things like that, as we're going to see. So, but it's useful to see that structure. So we're going to do a step-by-step construction. So I'll kind of speak a little bit. Anne has done this. She's going to start getting bits out, putting them on the table. Tonight we're going to. I think, did you say you've pre-stuck some bits?
Some bits are pre-stuck. So there's a bit of one I prepared earlier.
Yeah, just to save some time. We've got a whole day on Saturday. We've only got a short time tonight. So it's to kind of give a feel for, and it's to tie in with the text as we go through it, so you can handle the lines as we go through the text. Some elements specified in the Bible we haven't put into the model because they're just too fiddly. 50 kind of buttons, for instance, or fasteners. We're matching that with sellotape, to be honest. Things like that. But the big bits, the big elements of the structure are all there. And we've tried to create this to scale. And actually that's part of the power, if you stop and think about it, is how we're not fudging any of the sizes, but when we put them together, you actually suddenly see they do fit quite nicely in a circular context, which is one of the things that's quite nice. So it's not quite 1 cubit to 1 centimetre. It's 1.05, and that's because we used A4 paper.
No, it's because we use straws.
Oh, it's the straws, that's right, yeah.
Straws are 20 centimetres, so we're taking a 10 centimetre straw to represent
10 cubits.
10 cubits, but we have to connect them with something that's half a centimetre long.
Yeah,
so
the connecting bit is, so there you go, that's the answer, yeah, that was it, yeah. We also had fiddles with how big an A4 piece of paper is, because it's not quite 30 centimetres, it's 29.2 or something, so you know.
Anyway.
But fundamentally what we're doing is we're building something to scale. So let's start with covering fabrics and the joining mechanisms for joining those things together. So this is in the round model. What this is actually doing is we start by defining the kind of the circular walls, and there are actually, as we're going to see, 2 circular walls, and then it does the kind of upper parts, which is the roof canopy. So we've put their linen curtain. Actually, the Hebrew never says what this first curtain is made from. It's made from it's fine woven, fine cord, fine fabric, and so on. And so we've often assumed linen on top of that, which is not an unreasonable thing. And so I'm happy that we've got the word in there. But technically, the word never appears. It could actually be sheep's wool. It's not goat's wool because it specifies that differently. But we don't read about sheep's wool, and it might be goats and sheep's. But so that would solve the linen on top. But I'm going to assume it probably is linen. I'm just highlighting the fact it's one of those things that's been a little touch that's been added. So the fine quality curtain, which is a properly woven curtain, and it's the design of an artisan and so on, things like that. We find those descriptions. Let's just go to Exodus. So I've got my version as well. Exodus 26 verses 1 and 2. So moreover you'll make the tabernacle with 10 fine woven curtains, and normally within that fine woven you'll find that's turned into linen or fine weaved linen or something like that. And it's certainly true that linen would be the kind of thing that was in the ancient world was the thing that you got the best quality from. So blue, purple and scarlet you shall make them, with cherubim artistically crafted into them. So the cherubim or cherubim, as I said, we find actually is a Semitic word. It's not just in Hebrew. It seems to relate to intercessors. So this, in this sense, in English, they come to us as intercessory angels, and that's the kind of the idea. There's something about the whole thing which is being surrounded by a kind of the cloud of witnesses and the prayer going on in the thing. And the length of a curtain is 28 cubits, and the width of the of a curtain is 4 cubits, and every curtain has one size. So there is one, and we've got some on the table.
Okay, well, hang on, I have to go to the table.
Go to the table view for those who are watching.
Okay, so I don't know if you can hear me, but these are samples of our curtains. So we've got 2 sample curtains there, but we have 10. We should have 10. Yeah, maybe you. Yeah,
okay, so if I move on.
Yeah.
And then it goes on, so verse 3, so 5 of the curtains shall be joined together to one another. Okay.
Yeah, okay, so these are what we prepared earlier.
And then here, and the other 5 curtains joined to one another. So we start by reading, and you say, well, obviously if you look at what, here they go, 5 and 5. You can see when we make this to scale, it's going to get very nice and large. And you shall make loops of blue on the edge of the first curtain. Now, here's a quick moment to stop, because obviously if you take a single curtain, if you've got one of those single ones that we can wave around, you know, obviously you've got, which edge are we talking about, because the edges are very different. And the way the King James translated it, it actually translated one as being the selve edge, which in weaving terms would mean the long edge. But actually the Hebrew doesn't have to be that way. You see they've now put something onto they put an orientation on which is not there in the Hebrew. The Hebrew actually makes a reference to cut edges, which actually could be more a better description of the short edge. Because what we know is that they're joined edge to edge. So the question is, do we join them into a big square?
You have to do it in front of the camera. Do it in front of the camera.
Oh,
it in front of the
I could do it in front of this
yes.
one, yeah. So if we join them together one like this, obviously you can build them up. 5 of them becomes 20 cubits by 28 cubits, so you get kind of a large square section. And so we do that twice, we get 2 large square sections. Whereas what we're going to see with the circular one is all, in fact this is really the key where it all changes. The key is, instead of doing it like that, let's do it the other way. And instead of trying to build a surface, what we're actually building is the side wall. But actually, the way we're going to do it is, we get to, he says, the text goes on, and make loops of blue on the edge of the first curtain, from the leading edge in the join. So in other words, we're going to join 2 together, and so we make loops of blue on this piece.
Hang on. Yep.
And you're going to make the same in the trailing edge of the curtain that is outer, on the outside. So in other words, it's really just saying which you're going to flap over or flap to put the 2 together. So you've got on the second part of the join. So we've got loops on both of them, and you shall make 50 loops in the first curtain. You make 50 loops in the edge of the curtain that is the second of the join, so that the loops receive one another. In other words, you thread them through each other. Now, obviously, if you thread a loop through each other and then you pull on it, it just comes apart. But at this stage, we're just laying stuff out. We're getting stuff ready. Obviously, if they're not going to fall apart, you threaded them, you're going to either have to put a fastener in, which we are going to read about, or you're going to have to put a post through them. You've got 2 options. So you've got loopy tassels on the ends of both. You kind of thread them one through the other. You can either put a pole through all of them, which we're going to see is something that does happen, or you can create fasteners, which we're going to read about in the next little bit. But they're there as options. So the final join, it says, and you shall make 50 fasteners of gold and join the curtain sets together. Now it regularly, as you read through the text, will say each of them is the same length, each of them. But on this occasion it doesn't say for each, it just says one set of 50. And so in traditional models, most people recognise that. Occasionally you'll find a traditional model where they've made 50 for every single set of curtains, if you like. But most have recognised it's just one set of 50. And so you'll see in a circular tent it makes total sense. It makes perfect sense to just have one set. Because the reason why it makes perfect sense is eventually when the thing is actually constructed and erected, and the loops have gone over the posts, you need to have at least one place where the loops don't go over the post, the loops go around the post, and you put a fastener there. And then you can open the thing and people can get in. Does that make sense? Because if you don't have that section, you don't have you only need one set of fasteners. Everywhere else is going to be secured by the loop, but you do need one set of fasteners so you can actually open up and create a doorway. So there's just one set of fasteners, but there are 10 sets of curtains. So you kind of got these two things laid out. So here we go with materials. Oh yeah, you should make the 50 fasteners of gold. So put them in gold. So actually, in terms of materials, we actually have we've got the things we've made earlier, and have you got the little?
Oh, I've got.
Yeah.
You hold those up.
I will hold them up.
Yeah.
So what we'll be doing on Saturday is we're not going to make 50 fasteners, but on the model we're just going to stick on a couple of fastener labels, 5 pointed stars. Each star represents 10 fasteners, so we can physically do those. And we've just joined the things with sticky tape rather than making loops. When we were doing one of the experimental run-throughs, we did actually try threading those little wire twisters, but it just was messy. Too messy. We decided it was too fiddly and too messy. So it doesn't really take anything too much away. So we grouped them into 2 sets of 5. There we go. Yeah, put them lengthwise. Already done.
Okay, this is what we're actually going to do now.
So now we're going to stick the 2. Now, in the text, it doesn't tell us to do this at this point, but we're going to do it for the model because it's easier to do it now. If I can put it that way, the text has just effectively laid them out in 2 sets of 5. So the question is, why has it put them out in 2 sets of 5? Because we're going to see eventually, because there's loops on the ends of them, they're going to create one continuous piece. But actually, it's a bit like a kind of an IKEA layout sort of thing. You're going to actually have it's much more simpler because these are great big long things to actually put 5 on one side and 5 on the other to loop the loops through each other, ready for the poles, and then just do the last bits as you bend round. So this is partly the kind of the arrangement is for laying the things out for actual construction. by putting them in, rather than just having them all in a pile in the corner and getting one at a time as you need it.
Okay, so I think you're going to have to speak it, and then we're going to have to do it.
Okay, so yeah, so
number one. If you do number one.
So
stick the two long curtains
Oh yeah,
together.
okay, with sticky tape.
Okay, so if you'd like to stick, if you match the pattern and stick.
Yeah, so
together with a bit of sellotape.
so we're going to stick those. Yeah, stick a blue turple on the top of the. Yeah.
You just stick that.
See,
Okay.
yeah.
That's
For those watching, we did say this is going to be a bit of a clumsy evening. Partly this is for us practicing for Saturday, so we know the.
So now
and then we're going to get to the other end, and we're going to mark that with the little.
I'd like to stick the fasteners on.
Stick the fasteners on.
The outside.
On one of the ends for.
One of the ends.
Yeah. And we're going to put it aside because actually we're not supposed to really be doing this at this stage, but we just.
Yeah, and another one as well.
On this side.
No,
Well,
it doesn't really
but
matter.
doesn't really
There's a
matter,
bubble below. Yeah.
Whatever.
below it really. It's just saying that there's
Okay,
It's
so
just representing.
everything.
it's representing there's 50 fasteners. So we're just kind of we're constructing at this stage a little ahead of time, but it's kind of as we've read the description, we figured we might as well
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
put the things together. Because there's also then, so that's going to be the outside wall of the tabernacle, and we're going to put that to one side for the minute because we have to do the same thing with the goat's hair curtain. Now the goat's hair curtain, my contention, Andrew Hoy's contention, is that actually it is exactly the same as what is described as a white linen curtain. But remember how I pointed out the word linen is not there. It's just the term fine woven, and so this goat's hair curtain is also fine woven, and so it could be confused with then what becomes later in people's English texts gets referred to as a linen curtain instead of a goat hair curtain. But in the very same way, the thing is constructed, except that we have one group of 5 and a group of 6. So if you make goat hair curtains, goat's hair actually does make very fine quality wool. It makes cashmere, mohair and angora are all kind of premium style wools. I think technically I found out that you're not supposed to call them wools, they are just called what they're called, but they are good quality because goat hair is very fine. And so this one, we've got a set, the 11 curtains of one size, and you shall join 5 curtains as a single piece and 6 curtains as a single piece.
Okay, would you like to join that 6 on together? And I'll just put it on this here table panel.
So yeah, that's good.
Okay. That's good. Okay. And then if somehow you can show that this one is 6 long and this one's 5 long.
Yep.
Maybe you can speak that.
Yeah. So. Okay. So you and of course it's describing again how to do it. You're going to make 50 loops on the edge, but we're not doing that. So we in the same way as we did with the others, you're threading the loops together, which again tells us something's eventually going to go through those, and you're going to make 50 brass fasteners this time, and so finally what we're going to do, just because we're constructing ahead of time, we'll join the 2 bits together, and we'll stick the fasteners on the ends.
Yeah, I think you need to go. Sorry, you need to go back to the previous slide. Okay, and point out that there are 11 curtains. So we've got one group of 6.
Yeah.
And one group of 5, and also the group of 6 has got the one that's got the fold in it.
The fold in it, yes. So this one is okay.
This one is here.
It's that one, yeah. So the final piece is described as being folded over.
Okay, so we'd fold that over.
So we're going to fold that over.
Okay, and
and now, yeah, and this is where this is actually of course where pi falls out of the things, because each of these is 30 long. 10 of them times 30 gives us 300. The final one, which would be 11th, is no longer 30, it's now 15. So it's 315. Pi is 314.1. But we'll see when we actually kind of come to doing some bits, there's a little bit of juggling that goes on in terms of extra bits of cloth, which is going to kind of tie us down. But we're getting pretty close to the ratio pi already.
Okay, so can we just, while we just connect these two
Yep.
together, please?
So you can see these are quite enormous. These are going to be quite big scale. Doing 10 of these. No, we're not using all 10 tables now, are we? We've got 4, I think.
No, we've got 4 portions.
4 tables for Saturday. I don't know if this makes good television for those that are watching. It's not the way we normally do the teaching, but it's a good tryout for us.
So we'll just we can maybe fill that back.
And just
So that folded. So then we can, I don't know if I can see that.
and so yeah, so
But that's not a good place, that doesn't show on the screen.
so although we're just kind of holding it out so we can see it for the minute. We've got
Yeah,
the very slightly larger outer courtyard, so outer rim. One of the things you'll notice is it's not massively bigger than the actual ring of the tent. I mean, it works much more as you stop and you think about it. It becomes more like a windbreak for things inside, rather than a kind of defining a brand new area. So as I say, they're joined. They've got the 50 fast brass fasteners.
I've lost my fasteners. Sorry,
Okay, don't worry. But again, the thing to flag is that actually in this kind of system of joining with the loops, you end up with a single strand. In the older models, the 50 brass fasteners. Sorry, the 50 fasteners in 50 fasteners in both sets of blankets, effectively, kind of join 2 pieces together. And there's no obvious reason why you don't just join them together using the loops like you've done before. And there's nothing other than the fasteners that tell you how the loops actually hold the things together unless you tie them into a knot. It says that they go into each other, so then people assume, well, they must have to tie them. But it never says tie them. But for some reason they allow a middle layer on both of the curtains. Now if you just stop and think about what you've created, then you've got your little box and you've got a kind of a blanket over, and there's a heavy metal layer right through the middle. Remember that the inner curtain, the multicoloured one, doesn't quite reach the floor and nothing fixes it on, and so just the weight of that metal in the middle would actually start to kind of pull down and start to pull the sides up, if you stop and you think of it like that. And so you've got the 2 sitting on top of each other. You've got this kind of heavy ridge through the middle, which doesn't really, it's not really very clear what they're there for, but as we kind of put them into this circular thing, it becomes quite obvious when we see how the pegs then start to work with the elements. So you make your 50 brass fasteners, put the fasteners into the loops, and you join the covering together as a unit. And the remaining excess of the curtains of the covering, the remaining half curtain, which we've talked about, shall extend to screen the back of the tabernacle, is one way of translating that verse. So in other words, it seems that there's something about it that is just about creating a little bit of a cordoned off area that people can't see directly into. And then it talks about there's a cubit on one side and a cubit on the other side, and I put, and possibly that cubit's from the excess, but it's not necessarily, it's not 100% from the excess, from the length of the curtains of the covering, and they shall extend to the screen they shall extend to screen the sides of the tabernacle on this side and on that side to conceal it. So although we can't say exactly how these bended extra bits of cloth coming backwards work, there seems to be something that kind of curves around. One is quite long and the other is a bit shorter, but in different ways. It just means that if you're kind of got an angle looking in, you can't quite see too far around the side, because there's not going to be a huge amount of gap between this outer layer and the inner layer when it gets built. However, that is what allows you those last little moments, and I've done this in various ways. You can see that the outer curtains, as we're going to see, are threaded on very thin metal poles. So they dig into the ground. The poles are slightly longer than the actual height, probably because they get banged into the ground, and the loops therefore don't have to be very big. So if the loops aren't very big, you've got, as we've said, 10 full curtains times 300, 1 half curtain, 15. Then if you've got 21 sets of loops, and if you kind of assume something like about 3 centimetres, because we are talking about a metal pole, it's not a great big wooden pole, great big fat thing. So if you assume that 3 centimetres, you get a total of 316.1. But then we've been told to take a cubit off each end as well to fold the cubit back. So you get 314.1, which is now pi. So there's a little bit of, because I've assumed about 3 centimetres. The reason, in that you have to recognise that the cubits vary in size over time. But roughly speaking, they're roughly half a metre. A cubit's about half a metre. So 3 centimetres, that kind of thing gives you that little kind of flexibility. You can see in that sense, you can say, well, I'm massaging the figures, which is true, but they're getting very close, and in terms of the way we're engineering here, they make a lot of sense. Because we are told later on, but not at this stage, that the full length of the tabernacle and the courtyard is 100 across and 50 in all directions. So 50 from end to end, but actually if you measured it from the middle point to anywhere, it would come out as 50 in diameter, but the word diameter has never been invented at this stage. So just 50 in all places.
We'll do that at the end.
We'll do that at the end, yeah. Got the yeah. So we've just been doing that, gone through. So been talking through as we go. So we just remember we're just in the first sections. We're just kind of looking at the fabrics and how they sit together. When it actually comes to building the model, we're going to actually cover the roof is going to be made, and the text doesn't specify exactly the shape, but that's not surprising because to try and specify in an ancient world exactly how to define a dome is not easy. It just tells us you're going to make it from ram skins dyed red, and there's a top layer, a super high layer that is made of badger skins. Or some translations put pauper skins and so on, but it's difficult to know exactly what the animals are, and different people have different theories. But there are two types of leather. Majority of the roof is red, but for some reason there's a reference to another bit of roof that's a different colour. But that other bit of roof actually makes sense when we get to making the dome, because we'll see there are two parts to the dome. So there's a kind of a red part then, and as it turns out, and a brown part. So we got crepe paper for the skin, but we won't make you do that just yet. And we've got the whole day on Saturday. If you people can take their time. Now this is where it gets much more fun from the point of view of playing with stuff. So we're going to now start looking at the framework that's described. And so far I've not missed out any verses. We're up to verse 15, but there's nothing here that I've added. Just wanted to kind of get that across. We've not added anything so far, but we've now got physical things that represent everything we've read about pretty much. We haven't got loops and fasteners, but so it starts then by, so as I say, reviewing section 1. We've looked at the fabric materials that go into the tabernacle. I put perhaps it's for transport reasons. There's a basic division into two sets. Or for layout reasons, for constructing, do you lay them out one side and the other? Do you transport them in sets of 5 and so on? So now we're going to build the framework. So I put in north and south, hands and ribs. And those are two ideas that we're going to see appear in the Hebrew, which actually help us understand quite how some of these bits work. So the first section, starting with verse 15, the beams of the tabernacle, is what's going to be covered. It's going to look at their basic design and their quantity. So at this stage, that's really all we're looking at. So you should make beams for the tabernacle of acacia wood. So the King James goes with boards. And the length of a beam is 10 cubits, and the thickness of each beam is a cubit by half a cubit. Now, the King James doesn't say that. The King James says the length of the beam is 10 cubits and the thickness is a cubit and a half. And that's because you can't tell the difference, because the 1 cubit by half a cubit is said exactly the same way as a cubit and a half a cubit. Does that make sense? It's the same joining word. But normally when you're describing a plank, you've got 3 dimensions. And there are 3 measures given. There's a long one, and then we got 2 short ones. I've translated that the way it could be translated, which is to put changing the and to a by, effectively. So that the dimensions, then we do have 3 dimensions for the piece of wood rather than just 2. And it's those flat boards, those great big long flat boards that are 1.5 meters, which become the side panels in the traditional model. See? So we've lost those now. We've gone for something that are not small; they're quite strong. But the flip side is to make a board, because if it doesn't tell you how thick it is, it's just told you it's 1.5 this way and it's 10 that way. How thick is it? Well, we don't know. You remember some models assume that the poles that go through drill through 1.5 meters with poles strong enough to hold the weight. If you think about that. So how thick is that thing, and what kind of size trees do you get these from when you're in the desert? I know I'm sounding a little bit pedantic, but where do you get trees that big? They're not old English oaks knocking around, with the great big size things like that. So in many ways, again, in terms of the sorts of things you've got, it's much easier to find a 10 cubit long pole type plank. And remember that they're not neatly cut; they're kind of hewn out and sliced off and shaped down, whittled down. That's quite doable, but those great big boards are actually quite luxury. You'd probably need to import them from somewhere. And they shall have 2, and I've highlighted the word receiving because it's an assumed word I put in to clarify it. Receiving hands, but why? It's not that there's nothing in the Hebrew that says why, because the Hebrew word here, which the King James calls a tenon. And a tenon is a bit that sticks out. So if you've got a pole and you get a bit that sticks out, you can stick it into something. In kind of the Hebrew gets quite crude and kind of bodily as it describes the tabernacle. And I think we can assume it at this stage. Actually, it always goes with engineering. We talk about male and female parts of the socket. And a tenon is a male part within it's a bit that sticks out that you push into a sleeve. So in kind of our modern ways of thinking, it's the exact opposite of what the Hebrew says, because the Hebrew says it's a hand, but it's a female hand. It's because yod can be either way, but it's actually in this case it's a female hand. It's like a woman's hand. So it's a female hand. It's a receiving, which is why I've put it. It's a receiving hand. It's something about the shape. On the end of this bits of wood that's like a hand, and it's got one on the end of each beam, equally joined to one another. So I put that little comment down there. Actually, the literal thing, which you'll see in translations will say things like to one another, literally means woman to sister. So female hand is actually the literal thing that we translate as one to another is woman to sister. So it clearly understands them in a female way, if I can put it that way. The Hebrew is really definite on that line. We're talking about kind of a female to female type connection. And actually, if you just split the ends of 2 bits of wood, you do it at a quite small level, crude level, and you can actually kind of push them together, or if you think about hands, you can kind of push together, and actually you get something that depending on how well you've shaped it, actually creates a bit of a natural lock just by its joining together, if that makes sense. So it's probably describing something like that. Yeah, if you kind of
Dr. Spock.
It's kind of two Dr. Spocks. You kind of join one bit to the other, just in the ends of the bits of wood. I looked online to see if I could find it, because I've actually seen when you kind of go to certain parts of the world where wooden structures have been made, you often will see kind of split bits of wood kind of joining each other. I've actually seen it, but I couldn't find any photos online. So I think it's just describing that kind of approach. That the idea of a hand is like a cupped hand, and you got them on both ends, and you kind of push them together. One receives the other, rather than a kind of something protruding going into a hole in something else. It's just 2 parts that are equal in their shape. So, so you'll construct the beams for the tabernacle as follows: 20 beams edging southwards and to the right. And that's an interesting phrase, and it's worth addressing at this stage. That in terms of how the whole tabernacle is described, and this is one of those aha moments when I finally got it, you start, because remember we often use north, south, east and west very specifically. You find that actually they're less specific in the ancient world. They know where east is. The only place that's really certain is east. What they think of as west is often referred as seaward, and what they often think about north and south will be referred to as right and left, or desertwood, or whatever, you see. So it's kind of, the only thing that's really specific in the ancient world is we know where the sun comes up. So eastward is the fixed direction. And so everything in one sense is referenced from a point of view that imagines someone standing looking at where the sun comes up. Now I know where I am. Does that make sense? So then it says southward and to the right. Now the word southward there is desertward, which is to the south. It becomes a kind of a euphemism, so it's used even in places when the desert's the other side. So it's southward, but it's also to the right. So what that actually, if you stop and you think about it, I want you to kind of get this, it actually describes what we would now call clockwise. But the trouble is the ancient world doesn't have clocks. So if I am standing, looking east, okay, south is over here, and I'm turning right towards the south. Do you see how as I turn, I'm splaying out I'm turning southwards. I'm turning clockwise. So the 20 beams are actually laid out in a kind of clockwise direction, and you do 20 of them running clockwise round, and you make 40 guide rods of silver. So we're going to I think we got the construction slides in a minute, so I'll just read the text and then we'll look at the construction slides. The word guide rods are what the King James refers to as sockets. And they make these very heavy, weighty lumps of silver at the base of the poles. But the actual word that's used for them is the word dan. It's for a judge. It's like a judge. But the word judge is quite a broad word in Hebrew, and you can bring a judgment. I give you my opinion, but actually that's also guidance. Does that make sense? So it actually has a directional element to it. So there's the Hebrew word has the idea of direction to it. And so that's why I've gone for translating it as guide rods rather than sockets, because there's nothing in the Hebrew that implies sockets. The only reason it's sockets is because they've translated the female hand as a tenon, which needs a socket to go into. So you see again how the English requirement to make what their decisions already fit means we end up with a word that's misleading. Something that is actually a guide, so silver guides, so I've called them guide rods, has now been translated as socket because we needed the socket because we had a tenon. Even though we never had a tenon, we had something that received. So those 20 go round, 2 guide rods under each board, and for its 2 hands, and the 2 guide rods under each board for its 2 hands. Oh, I've got that twice, isn't it? So it's probably a bit of a doubling up there. And then we get this interesting thing. We get this second rib set, which is translated as side in most Bibles. But actually this side is not the same as the side that we've encountered up to now, because actually suddenly, as we've been laying out these poles, turning in a clockwise direction, if that makes sense, they're suddenly being referred to as being a set of ribs. It's plural ribs. Okay. And many of you know that the word for it can be a rib cage. It could be like a rib cage. So I've gone for rib sets. It's plural number of ribs, which can be a rib cage. So it's describing a rib cage with the word side. And so now we're going to do a second set, because we've done one by turning to the south of the tabernacle, but now on the north side. So in the same way that we've done that this way, starting facing east, turning clockwise, spreading them out, we're going to now do one on the north side. And so in the same way, but they're now being described as looking like sets of ribs. So 20 beams, and they're 40 silver guide rods, and 2 guide rods under a board, and 2 guide rods under each other board. So we put that together from a construction point of view. We're going to actually lay that out. So have we got we haven't got the directions, have we, at this stage?
Not yet, so we'll do that next.
Okay, so we'll just to get used to them. So the guide rods, we're going to see they come in sets of 20. But what we're going to, as we get towards the latter part of the script, we're suddenly going to see things move from being in 20s to being in 5s. And of course, the way you get 25 from 20 is by having things in groups of 4. So although it doesn't explicitly tell us how we do those things, we know that they come in sets of 4 and they've got kind of receptors on the end, and eventually we're going to find everything partitions into groups of 5. So we've already seen groups of 5. Sorry.
Yeah. What I was going to say was, if we're trying to end up with a set of 5 orange and a set of 5 red. But because I haven't got very much time, I've partly constructed some. But these are the ones. These are 10 cubits long.
Yeah.
And
these are the extra little bits.
These are the silver connectors.
Yeah.
So in order to make one rib, then we need to do it together like that.
So what which I haven't actually described. I've just been kind of laying out.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. This is why we're doing it this way. We're learning how we we get these things across. I've mentioned. So we've already seen, of course, the idea of 5s, because we noticed that. Remember, we set out when we laid out the panels for the tabernacle, we laid them out in 2 groups of 5. And now we're going to put out 20 on both sides, and eventually we're going to see another things grouping in groups of 5. So to make this work, the way it happens is we put them into 4s, so we get 5 sets of 4, spreading out as kind of like ribs along the side to the north and to the south. We can, and if we've colour coded them for red and orange, so we can keep track of which side is which. So I'll let you do that. And as those are coming together, so we're hopefully not taking too long. Sorry, I'm not rushing you, Howard. I feel really bad. This doesn't feel like that slick, organised teaching I normally like to do. and Josh is going to go back and say, Dad, what did you make me come to? It's like
never lived this down.
Playing with Lego.
Yeah. Well, never work with children or animals or craft materials.
Or craft materials, yeah.
I'm going to another. That's a set of 4 each.
Set of 4 each.
Oh, sorry, the protection on the far end. So there's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
2. For the moment, can we just not have one in the end?
Keep the end ones off.
So we're
Yeah, these are all good things to learn.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
when we're describing it on Saturday, we'll know what to...
It's the Levite's job to put.
Yeah, so those are the south ones. Then we should make the north ones.
It's a very good point from Howard. This is what the Levites spent their time doing.
But we've
I've got my Levite hat on today.
that's very okay.
So the key thing really in one sense, what we want people to have the experience is to see that we're not fudging anything in description. So everything we're doing matches something that's there in the text, which hopefully is making sense at the moment.
That one. Yeah. Something exciting as we crack on.
Good. Okay. So the next thing, which probably we should probably put this before, so we get people to lay out, because we've talked about laying to the south and and to the north. But actually, what Anne's got is we've got little labels. So because from now on, as we kind of construct things, we're going to find that actually instructions are given in terms of directions from the base point. So we need to mark for the table where you'd like east to be.
Just to make the point that this area of the table is obscured on the screen that they're seeing. So we want to try and keep everything over here,
over that way if possible.
That area there.
Okay. So but let's make this east then, shall we? Is that, yeah.
There you are. Do you want to?
Well, you can decide where you'd like east. Yeah, you've gone for technical east because east is in that direction.
Well, no, actually, yes.
The slight problem with that is just seeing the join, the fastening, because that's if the fastening space does not matter.
Don't worry.
Okay,
this won't be the slickest video we've ever done. So
do you want me to put this out?
So let's put we forget the north, south, east, and west. So remember how these are supposed to be. So the join is at the east. Is going to be at the east.
Well, not actually. The curtain that curtain is in the east. So the join will be slightly southeast.
Is the doorway facing east?
Yeah.
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah.
It's roughly
Yeah.
facing,
Yeah.
just a little bit off
This,
centre.
this is the eastern curtain.
The eastern
running
curtain, yeah.
Oh, okay.
There. So then there'll be a
And then we got
western one over
western
here.
one.
Over there.
Over there, and
Ish.
south.
And then the ribs that we've now created, remember they start from the east, but they start to come round radially round clockwise.
Yeah, so they'd start one there, and then they'd go to each of the joins.
Okay. Pointing into the centre.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where you can where the sellotape joins are is a convenient point for each of those sets of beams that have been joined together to create ribs.
So they're about 9, calculated earlier, about 9 degrees apart. 360.
That's right.
Well, in one sense, if you just use the sellotape markers,
Yeah, well, that's good.
because actually we didn't sellotape the posts on,
no,
did we?
haven't. No,
That's going to come now.
that comes.
Okay.
So,
But I think we might just stand them up because we've got time to filter.
Yeah.
That's those sellotape markers there. Okay,
Yeah, that actually will join. We'll have to sellotape it up,
okay, sorry. No
even
problem.
though in reality it would open.
Well, yeah.
Right, so we're getting to the.
So maybe we could just sellotape that up there.
So it's fastened, in other words, at the
It's
moment.
fastened.
Yeah. For the east, right? Okay. So that's roughly what we've had described so far. And the key thing, which hopefully everyone's getting, so the centre of origin actually isn't in the middle. Centre of origin is actually at the east end, where the guy stands
Yeah.
to start with. Yeah.
Oh, that's your compass bearing, basically.
Yes, your compass
Yeah.
bearing. Yeah. So
Yeah,
so because when it talks about things being westward, it doesn't necessarily mean right over here to the west. It just means west of origin. That's why we've done it that way. So what then? So here you go. There's a thing. This is the linen coloured strip. We've just kind of laid it out at the moment, so it looks something like that. So we've got five south ribs, 5 north ribs. We've got. Have I just jumped past?
You need to go back. Yeah. So that's what
Lined up.
That's what we've just done.
That's what we've just done. Yeah.
We haven't put the angled connectors in here because these are going to be.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
They're eventually going to.
So we should have said that we're going to put an angling connector because this is going to join onto a post.
Like that.
But the post has got to go down.
Stand up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to put those in, so make sure you get the bendy one opposite the one you put in the end of the straw.
Okay.
So that it bends down a little bit. In other words.
Yeah. So that it will be like that. With that going down. Does that make sense?
Oh, the other way around.
So put the bendy one opposite where you're plugging in the straw.
Oh.
Have you got a bendy?
Well, yeah, it's just. Yeah,
Sorry.
other way around.
That opposite.
Opposite one.
Like that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's what I did first of all.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, hang on. So it did? Oh, I put it over.
So what we got to think about for Saturday is how to break up the explanation and then the actual construction, isn't it? To do it probably slightly. But that's why it's useful. Thank you guys for being guinea pigs tonight.
Alright. Hang on. That's not same as that.
So this is exciting viewing for those watching from home.
And
And that's why I keep kind of saying it so you can hear what I'm saying, which is everything we're doing here has in some way or other has got a description we've just read. We've not done anything which doesn't have an explanation actually in the text. It's just not necessarily the way people have seen it before.
That one. Okay.
So when we've got those, shall I assume they start to come? It then actually describes two sets of 5 supporting posts, which again you see the groupings of 5s and 10s and everything still kind of working together, which we're actually going to raise these up on, you see, so that and they become they're what goes through the loops that we've kind of modelled with sellotape. So we're going to jump ahead at this stage and do this at this step. Oh yeah, we're going to jump ahead. Okay, so what we're doing is if I go back to what we were looking at 26:15 to 20, we're going to now jump ahead, I think. We've jumped out a few verses, and the reason we're doing that is because it's much easier at this stage if we put these posts in now.
Well, yes, we're now visualising.
You're now visualising what's going on.
You can go back and read the text.
Yeah, you can read the text and see. We've just jumped a few verses forward because it's most convenient to try and do this at this stage. So 2 sets of 5 supporting posts. In the original kind of models, these are the things that you can see. I've highlighted them with the yellow arrows on 2 sides on this particular model. Can you see? They normally see these poles. They translate them as poles, as running along the length, the full length of the, which is the kind of 20 times 1.5, so 30 cubit long, great big long poles that run the kind of the length.
Wouldn't work on fairly uneven ground.
Which wouldn't work on uneven ground. It'd be very, very difficult to put them in practice. So whereas what we're seeing is that the poles are actually, because one of the things that they finish with is then you raise the tabernacle once the poles are in. So the poles are rather than running through the boards, they're actually going to go through the loops. And the way we do that, as Anne is preparing it, is we've got some little poles.
Right, well, should we go to the next?
Which are,
okay,
there we
so
go,
we've got
nice green.
Okay, so then we just need to show the table. So here are the green.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So the length actually in the text isn't specified, but we can assume it's just over 4 cubits. Just kind of makes sense to run through the 4 cubits worth of loops. And it's going to be slightly off the ground. It's going to hook into exactly the same receiver that's on the end of those poles as they've been used. So the receivers, sorry, we should have said, the receiver's probably joined, and we can imagine in different ways in which a simple metal rod can be used to secure. So if you got 2 hands that are joined together, you could kind of stick a pole through that way, to kind of lynch the 2 together, and maybe another one this way. Actually, Andrew Hoy, in the way he does it, is he has one that goes through this way, it's a short one, and he has a long one that kind of joins to the next pole to kind of create some of the curve, to create some of the shape. Whether that's necessary or whether it's just 2, it doesn't really matter. But the key thing is you don't need a huge amount of metal for them, and we don't have a huge amount of metal, and we have a limited supply of silver and gold and brass, and so those are the kind of the guidelines, as I said, that you kind of which we've got here, and the same mechanisms that we've used to kind of join these together can be used to join the poles as well, although there is an extra piece, as we'll see. So there are 2 sets of 5 supporting posts. So what we're going to do is if we stick them at each joint.
Right, and the point is they're slightly longer than the 4, so that when it goes out it just protrudes a little bit, so it'll stand a bit proud, so that it doesn't get damaged by the ground.
So if you stick those round, pass them on.
Pass them on. Oh, wait a minute, I've got to show this happening. I'm multitasking.
Yeah, thank you, Anne.
Yeah.
I feel very lazy. I'm just sitting in this chair, but that's I'm on this.
You've got the easy job.
I've got the easy job.
Oh, no, just facilitate again.
To be honest, really on Saturday, Anne ought to be presenting this because she has done far more work on this.
Yeah, I just have another piece.
Yeah, that's right. To get us off.
Oh, just leave it.
Well, I failed my Levite group exercise challenge.
That's right.
You've
You've been fired as a Levite.
Yeah, reapply next year after you've done some stuff.
Yeah, you made a mess of the loop there, Howard. Yeah.
This is how you weed out the Levites from group exercising.
Yeah. But the nice thing is you're beginning to start to notice as you kind of get these in is that although it doesn't have to take a huge amount of weight, there's a little bit of tensioning that goes on with the when the thing goes up that actually helps create the circle. So we unlike as we have it at the moment where everything's floppy and the circle disappears all the time. Once you start to get things in place, the tension being held by the fabric, means that the circle appears quite naturally.
We're not being very specific.
No, that's why I've already.
Leave one at the just here.
Okay.
And leave one over there.
So you can probably guess and see what's coming next. It looks like they're all on. So
Okay, now we've got it.
yeah, so that's just what we've done, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
that's what
just
we've done.
describing that. Yeah. So now we're getting ready to kind of start putting things up, except that the problem is they're not joined at the middle, so there's nothing to kind of create shape. And so we're actually going to, that's what we describe next, which is in the verses that we've just skipped out, I think, isn't it? Yeah, in the verses we just jumped over. Actually, it describes how we join the centre together. We've referred to it there nicely as the circular vault. Actually, in my translation that I've used, which is a proper technical word, it's a proper architect's word, is the groin vault. And the reason for that is the King James Version and most translations, they talk about the groin vault. Oh, sorry, they talk about the boards to the west or the back of the tabernacle, and the word west is used. But remember again, as we said, once you start to realise that everything is described from a point of origin, which is on the east side, so west doesn't necessarily mean we think of the centre of the thing, and then we'd say west or east. But actually, this is the eastern edge, and everything is west from there. So it basically tells them to construct the thing from the west of the point of origin, and it describes something which they refer to as the back wall. But the word "back" is a word that is more realistically. Yeah, I've got it in here. So I'll read the text first. It says, "For the groin vault of the tabernacle, westward you shall construct 6 beams, and 2 beams you're going to make for the curved segment." That word "curved segment" is often translated as corners, but actually that's what it means. It's a curved segment. It's it means turning. It's got the word turning in it. Of the tabernacle in the groin vault, and they shall be coupled together down low, and they shall be a coupled unit overhead as a single ring. And this is how it will be for the 2 of them, and how it will be for the 2 curved segments. So there shall be 8 beams in total, with their silver guide rods, 16 guide rods, 2 guide rods under a board, and so on. So you've got numbers and things there, you can go through them. But basically I've gone for the translation groin vault because the actual Hebrew word that is just translated as being the back of the tabernacle, actually, here he goes, is Yeretka, which comes from Yarek, and I've kind of followed this all the way through. You can actually see it's often a thigh, is the way that Andrew translates it, but by euphemism it refers to the generative parts. You find that you actually find it is translated that way as loins, I think, at one point in the King James. And it's the kind of and the crotch is a reasonably good English description. And a groin vault is called a groin vault because this is how it looks. You can see it there. On that one there, you can see there are 5 bars coming together, but you could be 5, 6. In this case, we've got 6 beams coming together to create what is referred to in the Hebrew as the crotch. But because our English translations are far too polite to say that, we've turned it into the word back, which makes us assume it's the back wall. So if you go back, what we've said is we're going to build this kind of something that's going to look a bit like this, and with various bits coming together. So in fact, what we've had described for us, if I go back again, so we're going to use 6 beams, and then we've got 2 other beams, which it doesn't tell us exactly how long they are, but actually what we find is that when curves are measured in kind of biblical world, they take the kind of the length from the 2 ends rather than actually the thing around there. So it wouldn't tell us any better anyway. In other words, they would be a curve that came up to stood the same height as a straight pole would just be described in exactly the same way.
So could you do that again a bit more towards the camera?
Okay, yes. Okay. So kind of very often you find in the ancient world, particularly in days before things like degrees and pi have been described, is that curves are described just as the length between the 2 points. So obviously if you have a semicircle, the 2 points might be exactly the same length. The length of that curve would be described by what we'd call its diameter. Whereas we would naturally think of the length of the curve around the circumference, but that's how they would describe it. So in this case, it wouldn't really help us if they described the length anyway. But what we're told is we've got 6 beams, but then you've also got 2 beams which are going to be curved segments. And it actually goes and tells us its corners there, but it says how on earth we haven't taken this seriously, that they should be coupled overhead. Okay, so they're coupled together down below. What does that mean? In other words, underneath the actual wood, we're going to put the joints in. So if you can imagine the two sections, we're going to put the joints in underneath, but then they're going to be overhead as a single ring. So in other words, when you lift it up, the two curved bits are going to create a single ring. And this is how it'll be for the two of them and how it'll be for the two curved segments. So there should be 8 beams in total. I've put the words in total in italics, but just to kind of, that's why you've got 6 at the beginning, 2 that are curved, which means 8 in total, with their guide rods, with those rods which you've coupled them together with, they go underneath the wood, but the whole thing is going to actually sit overhead. So all that's put in there. So that's what it's going to look like eventually. So in terms of pieces, this is what we're aiming for. So we've got the two curved segments, 2 semicircles, which is making sense in this kind of context. And there is a degree to which the shape that's beginning to emerge is shaping the way we're seeing and understanding this. But what I'm showing is once you put the words against the visuals, it does make sense. So it's made up of 8 beams. So as per other curved parts of the tabernacle, measured length is given the distance between the ends rather than around the circumference. We find that regularly. So to make this, we actually have to do this in ways a little bit different to the way it's described. Because to get the bendiness, we're going to have to join several small pieces together, and because as we're going to see, they're going to join to the parts around the outside. We're going to need to put some extra joints in. So we're going to create the 2 longer, 2 bendy bits. Oh, you've done them already.
Yeah. So let me just get the table camera.
So you can see we got.
Okay.
So we got.
Okay. So we've got.
We got 2 what will be slightly longer and slightly bendier parts, and then we're going to, because the length is described, it's the simplest thing for us because we don't have a star joint in the middle, is just to crisscross over, and we've that slightly breaks the totally to scale, but only very slightly. So it's a kind of a good compromise.
Okay, so these are the 2 curved segments that if we put a connector in either end, you can then make into a circle.
Okay.
Sorry.
So it might be a little bit bitty, but actually I'm getting quite excited as we get close to it to see that
I'm getting impatient to get this thing constructed.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, and you notice we're not doing anything that's not in the text, and we're doing it roughly in order.
Over here, so just kind of hold it there. So
once you get that out, we're visualising it right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's just, where's the camera? There.
There's the camera, yeah.
Yeah, you can see it. Okay, so now we've got the circles. So then we're going to put the crosses. In. So, do you want to talk about the north-south thing or not?
What this? You mean the yes? Okay. Eventually, what we're going to find is, for stability, there's going to be a complete run that runs which runs from the very north side to the very end side. It's the only point where there's a continuous line of beams.
So that goes into there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So that makes sense because you're stabilising.
Because that then stabilises.
And then these will be at equal angles, so you need these nifty little things.
Okay, so they've got to be.
So it might be easy to do on the floor then lift it up.
Okay.
So they just crisscross equally.
So we need to do
Yeah, like that.
something like that, something like that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Josh, you're the mathematician. You can tell me if I'm off there.
Actually, this is useful because I remember doing this when we did it at your house, Anne. But as we sat down here, I'd forgotten the fact that we have to put these extra joints in.
I've refined this about 3 times. but what we've not made the point is that the quantities, all these connectors are the silver parts referred to in the text.
In the text, yes.
And so we actually have the right number of silver connectors.
That is a really very, very good point to make for those watching. That all these little connectors, which look like they're total fake, are actually, in one sense, stand for the guidelines or for the guide rods. Yeah. They may not be particularly rod-like; they may look a bit more like sockets, but they do at least stand for them.
Yeah.
Fiddle with the angle if they need to. Yeah.
Horizontal.
Yeah, so this is the one
That's,
that
that's
you
the
need
bracing
to
one.
keep.
That's the
So-
north-south one.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
are the
So
two.
just move that round a
Yeah,
bit. Yeah.
just we can
Okay,
fiddle
that's
with the
good.
angles.
Yep.
That's good.
That's
Okay, good. So you know which your north-south line is.
good. Oh, yeah,
That's the
so
north-south.
we've done.
So we've
Yeah,
gone
we've
through.
done- we've done
We've
all
done
that.
that. Yeah.
But actually, if you go back to the previous one, that shows that we. So in the text it says 16 silver connectors,
Yeah.
and we've used 16.
16. Right.
But just in our model,
It just
we
it just
have
happens.
to use
Yeah.
one set of two twice,
Yeah.
rather than having two.
Put that underneath.
Do you want to put that underneath the main one?
Because it's a bit stretched.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it'll be there. Brace it underneath that.
Okay, getting it really nice and solid. Okay, so you get there's this kind of central line here, which
That's perfect. Yeah.
so you've got your central line, which it then refers to, and the central bar with the central beams shall run from edge to edge. Okay,
Yeah.
so
So that's going to be
That's the
this
north-south.
this one to that one. Okay,
good.
let's
So
go
you
to the
can
next-
actually
we
so
can go to the next slide.
so we go to the next slide. Yep. Okay, so the central north ribs and the central south ribs have got to line up directly with that middle section.
Yeah.
With the thigh brace or the crotch vault or the groin vault, to allow them to be a continuous line from the bottom of the from the north right the way to the south. So we got that continuous
Yeah.
line. Okay. So 2 sets of 5 supporting posts for a circular groin vault. What have I got there? Oh yes, that's right. So we're going to lift that up now
Well, when we've got the post.
when we've got the posts. Yeah. So we need posts to get that up in the air, which is what comes next. Now, this is in one of those areas where there's slightly different ways of translating and slightly different ways of constructing. So we've taken a line at the moment because obviously we have to construct something.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Just
Um,
made that clear. Yeah.
But is one of the areas that when Anna and I have gone through stuff, we've been debating which way it could go, and actually you could end up with slightly different shapes inside as a result of how you do this. Because if you read it at the most natural way, it looks like you just have 5 pillars. 5 pillars round to the west. But there is a way of reading it where you actually end up with 10, which makes most sense because we actually have 10 segments. So that's so it says here if we read through it.
Right. But don't we need the previous? Oh. What's happened to the other, the 27A? 26 and 27?
I'm not sure actually. I noticed that when I was just running through, but it was a bit too late for me at that stage. So we lost that verse.
Yeah, I don't know where. There should be 26, 27. Is it?
Was that weren't those the verses that we jumped to before?
No. I don't know.
Okay, so we may have lost a little bit of the
Have you got
translation.
26, 27 there?
Crossbar also make crossbars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames on one side of the tabernacle, 5 for those on the other side, and 5 for the frames on the west.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
that's
That's the
the
bit,
far
yeah.
end of the tabernacle.
Yeah. So the 26, 26 and 26, 27A talk about 2 lots of 5 supporting
Yes,
beams.
that's why probably when you were talking on the phone, I couldn't find it in the thing. So because actually I can, as you read it there, I can see it here both
Yeah.
the back and the west. Probably got 2 separate words there,
Yeah.
which is where he gets 10 from. That makes.
Yeah.
So we've gone for 10, and now it's actually helping. It's probably because we've lost a verse or half a verse. Well, I couldn't see it when we were running through a bit. So because I'm sure some people are tuning out now, but stick with us and you'll see the thing suddenly pop up. So we're basically getting sets of 5. 5 posts for the beams of the rib set of the tabernacle, and for the groin vault, and I think it's there. It just says to the west, but there's been a reference to the back as well, hasn't there? And it's probably that extra word. So I need to go and have a look at what we've missed out there.
Okay. So basically, do you want to
The way we're going to
put
build
these-
this, yeah.
Okay.
So this is actually what it's defining is the structure which is going to lift the ring up. There are 5 wooden bars and 5 pillars. So 10 long blue straws made of.
Yeah. So basically, we don't have a long enough blue straw, so we have to construct it by having a long one
With an
joined
extra
to a short
bit.
one. Like.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Gonna-
Sorry. So our straw here, I don't know if you can hear me, is too short. So we have to join a long one to a short one with a connector to make it the right length. So we
Yeah.
end up with one
like that.
like that.
And the good thing about having
So
the
we need 10
connector
of
is
these, if we can quickly-
it actually allows us to then create a little kind of supportive ring, which isn't described in the text, but because we're using straws, it gives it a little bit of extra strength. That is the case, isn't it, at this stage, Anne?
Yeah.
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 So you can see Anne's already got one in place there. Some.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So the cross bit is not in the text. It wouldn't be needed if we were building this life size, because the at least some of these posts, as we were touching on before, are actually ones that are described as being with a word that means freestanding, which probably means they're dug into the ground a little bit. So
So
they
we've just got to do this. Yeah, and our straws are very bendy, whereas they're made from solid wood
theirs are made from solid wood, yeah.
and big, heavy pieces of wood.
So we need especially reds to interconnect.
Yeah, so they're just going to strengthen.
Sure.
I can do a couple of these as well.
So once we've got these 10 extra long straws and we're starting to join them together, so because our blue straws are bendy, we're going to create that little ring at the bottom to hold them all in place.
This is fun. Yeah, voila.
No,
Oh, no,
you can make it all the way around.
Sorry, all the way.
Yeah.
Then,
Oh,
dear.
yeah, you've got to do it really carefully.
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure that the ends are
Definitely
really
failed
pushed
my
into
Levi group exercise.
really pushed in, otherwise they'll pop
They'll
out.
pop out.
But we do know they do work, because we have
They
built
do.
this now a couple of times.
Mhm. Right.
Push that one in,
Yeah.
and then bend it round,
Bend it round.
push it right in. That's it. So
That's
those
it.
are our posts. Oh!
Once we start joining them to the top ring, of course, it will all start to.
Yeah.
Get
Okay, so these are our posts.
So these are the posts, and now what that, of course, is going to happen. Finishing touches. What then comes is finishing touches ready to raise. So it talks about gold rings and overlays. You shall overlay the beams with gold and make gold rings to house the posts. So in other words, what it's saying is down here, although we've already got some silver guides and so on, it talks about some nice looking kind of gold covers for here, and towards the top probably as well. And so now the external structure is ready to raise up. And so verse 20 says, and you shall raise up the tabernacle. See, all the bits we've created, everything we now need, there's nothing that we put on there. If you removed any one of those bits, you wouldn't be able to raise the tabernacle.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? And at the very point where we've got everything that we need to raise the tabernacle, and we're told that now you can raise it up. So we've got that opportunity. And so, of course, the way we're going to do that is we need to fix our ring that we made, our groin vault, is going to be joined to the top of the tall blue pillars.
Yeah, well, first of all, we're not going to join. Well, we have to put these in.
Yeah, so we can. I guess which way we do it is.
Okay. Well, let's join the north-south one of this first.
So you want to make sure you get the ridge that runs north to south, because that's the if you like, the stability line, because there's that solid pole that runs north to south.
Yeah.
Okay. So should we put them in? Put them in. We'll have to chisel the.
It goes in there.
Could you?
I'll hold it.
See, this is why it's definitely a team effort, which is why it's quite nice they're doing it at a table, not as individuals.
British Airways interview, Joshua.
Okay. So if I hold that, do you want to put the?
The next one.
Or should we put this in? Should we put this in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now.
And then do it in diagonals, like you're tightening up a cylinder head.
Okay. So you should have all the right number of things poking down.
Yes.
So you won't be using these. You're using all this pokey ones.
So let's do this one on the side.
out. Okay. This one. Yeah.
So just making a larger umbrella, really.
Yeah, it's kind of. Fantastic! It's actually beginning to look quite good.
Because as it gets under tension, you can start to feel.
You can actually start to feel it beginning to kind of
strengthen itself under that tension. Oh, we've got a better crossbeam.
Yeah. And you can see little. As you look at it, you can see old joins that can be pushed together a little bit, which probably, if you get those, suddenly start to. The shape will start to kind of come together. There's one there. I can see that.
This one.
On the orange, first orange one, second joint
one.
in.
This one here.
Yeah, there's a bit of a gap.
Yeah.
I bet if you
give it
a bit of takes,
okay.
So you're beginning to see how the thing is kind of holding together. It's one of
now this answer, I think this answers the question I've got about the Holy of Holies. Yeah.
So what will then happen is when we do the insides, the Holy of Holies becomes a ring inside the inside that central ring.
Because this is what I've been wondering all along. How do they deal with the inner part?
So we won't spend too long tonight on the inner part because we're beginning to see the shape coming together.
Yes, that's right. But I can see it now.
We have actually got the bits for the Holy of Holies.
But it's obvious where it's contained.
Yeah, you can see where it's going to be contained. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's beginning to kind of come together.
So am I right in thinking, Christian, this is considerably bigger than the traditional one?
It's considerably bigger. Yes.
So quite a few priests could get in there. And
you've got to think this is about 90 cubits, wasn't it? In the end, 89 something.
Yeah, about
circumference. Diameter. 89 sort of. Because then there's an outside one which we've started to do, but which is 100 altogether.
It's really very very compelling, isn't it? When you do it like this.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing is, because actually what we've done by doing it step by step, because it's very easy when you just hear text, you lose. Oh, did he say that? When did he say that? But what we tried to show is now you can query why I've translated things the way I have, and I haven't yet put all of that detail down to say, but you've got bits of it as we went. Yad is female hand, not a male hand, and it's then described as woman to sister. So that's why it feels much more like
not as we think male and female connectors. It's two female to female.
It's female to female connectors.
Held under tension.
Yeah, and so you can see there is logic in the Hebrew words for some of the things, and like the rib sets, the fact that sometimes when it's talking about the curtains, it refers to the side as a face, because actually as a curtain it's a face, it's a facet. But when it's talking about the beams, it refers to them as ribs, because actually that's exactly what they are.
Is it Andrew Hoyle, David?
Yeah, Andrew.
Did he look into the actual springiness or tension of acacia wood and things like that?
He's not done that.
The specified type of wood, presumably cut properly and seasoned properly, would have sufficient.
They'll have a bit of bend, but equally because the joints that we've got in there are genuine joints. There are joints at that point, so you can actually create. In terms of the way you put the two pieces together, you can probably kind of create a slight bit of angles for each one.
Yeah, it gives it flexibility as well, because every rod is not going to be exactly straight.
Yeah.
So with multi joints, you can reorder the poles to
get the thing, and get it to go up. So now we come to the inside bits, because that's the next section. We'll do this quite quickly. What time have we got? Because I've got.
It's 9:05.
Oh, we're not doing too badly. We aim for finishing about 9:30, so I reckon we'll get there. So there we go. It's one of my misspelt veils. The veil for the most holy place. So if you make a veil, I like to spell veil like fail. So anyway, pardon?
I thought I changed all.
So maybe it didn't connect. Yeah, hadn't synced. So you make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet, fine woven, artistically crafted with cherubim, and you shall hang it on 4 standing pieces of acacia wood, overlaid with gold. So it's just a description, of course. So we're making another curtain, and it's just like the outside one in terms of its fabrication. And you shall hang it on 4 standing pieces. This is where I've got to rethink through some of my translation. Some of the word that is used, I think, in the King James, it refers to these as poles. No, it's not poles. Can't remember what. But they're actually the same as we're going to see the pegs that hold up the outside tent. And I found and I haven't had time to put the Strong's definitions, but as you dig through to the root word, it has the concept of something that seems to self-stand. So so they are upward poles, but actually what they imply are things that you put into the ground a little bit, so that they kind of stand up to some degree on their own, if that makes sense. So we've got these kind of bits that therefore freestanding kind of poles of acacia wood, or freestanding pieces of acacia wood, overlaid with gold, which have gold hooks on the 4 silver guide rods. So which are in yellow because we've colour coded those little things of the straws that we've got. And you shall hang up the veil under the fasteners, and shall bring the ark of the testimony in there within the veil. So the fasteners is there's going to be some bits at the top level, which are going to just allow us to join things together. And there are lots of different ways we can imagine how that will work. At this stage, there's a kind of a degree, because we're looking at a frame with lots of bits you can hang things off, that you can attach things to. So there's a degree to which we can probably imagine how this could be done differently than we're modelling it, but the model kind of will work. And that's where you're going to put the Ark of the Testimony within the veil. And the veil, now I'm using the veil correctly, shall separate the holy place from the most holy for you. So inside is holy, right in the middle is going to be most holy. So let's find a way of doing this. So 4 silver guide rods, 4 yellow pieces, with connectors. And then so these are a kind of pure metal, probably, if you stop and you think about it. So we've used them on the whole up to now. Remember I said that the word for sockets is like, got the word Dan, which is a judge or a guide within it. But they're probably making more of a circle. We've got a circle in there. They're going to sit within that. So we're going to create this kind of a, and this is what I mean. We can imagine different ways, but this kind of works. It fits the description. And then you've got the 4 standing pieces, which we're using green straws for, and you join the 4 short yellow straws into a ring using the connectors, which Josh is doing. Because our green straws are bendy, we need to provide extra support, so we make one at the bottom as well.
The red ring.
And a ready-made red ring. But these are probably, because they're described as freestanding, they probably, to some degree, they bury into the ground a bit as well. They dig in.
Can you make sure that you get the spigots going vertically down so that they go nicely in?
So we'll build ourselves a nice little tube like we've got in the corner. So as I say, the bottom is just to give us that little bit of stability. So the Holy of Holies, because we haven't created a fabric for any of. We probably won't do fabrics tonight. On the day, we'll allow people to kind of cover their bits.
Yeah, we have.
We've got the material, which could be used. But here's the structure or the framework that we're going to put then into the centre. And with this, of course, we've got a little bit of variance in how we do size and how it attaches to the frame outside it. Somehow or other, we now need to get that into the middle.
Yeah, we just have to lift the whole thing up and put it in. Yeah.
Whoop. Whereas obviously, if we were kind of constructing it properly, there we go. So, and in terms of the way that we understand things like the guide rods and how they connect and how close they get to the poles coming down, all of those sorts of things could all vary somewhat. But you have therefore a framework to again kind of create that little kind of cover for. right there in the centre.
Sorry, I had to snap it from us. Just to show really what we've been
Yeah.
doing.
And then the final little bit, a lot of text here. The courtyard enclosure, which we read is 100 cubits long. So it says, "You shall make the enclosure of the tabernacle, edging southward and to the right." Same phrase again. In other words, kind of winding it round clockwise as we kind of work it round. To the right, and it will be fine woven hangings. Now, you see, this is where, as I say, fine woven. We know that they're made of goat's hair, but goat's hair does make fine cord, and it doesn't say linen anywhere in any of these things. So it's not a contradiction. In most models, this is a totally new material. But as we've seen, all the material was said that was defined at the beginning. So it makes more sense in terms of if there's a logical structure that this is just going back to the same thing. Does that make sense? So you're going to take the bit that we've already got, that long piece that we have, and it refers to its length as being 100 for the first side. But as I said, that's what you often find with curved structures, is actually from the end to end rather than we think of it. Because we know, which is part of the reason why people often wouldn't notice this, because they say, oh, no, it's not that. It's because that's 167 or whatever it is long. But actually from end to end, as you follow around the circle, it makes a kind of a circle around the outside of 100 cubits. And its standing pieces will be 20. See, that's standing pieces. So it's got rods. But notice it's got 20 in terms of so we've got 10 partitions. Is that right? I'm just trying to remember where they go now in the So I'm beginning.
So these were made from the 10 plus the,
Yeah, that's
the
right.
half, the folded, the 11th curtain was folded, but each, I think, are we talking about the poles now?
Yeah, I was looking at the standing pieces of the poles that they join in.
That each piece that was 30 cubits has, every 7.5 cubits has 4 for each one.
For each one, yeah.
Yeah.
So some of them will go through the kind of smaller loops, and some of them will just kind of actually stretch out to kind of put tension. And they also, it's also, which we haven't particularly done in this. There's a kind of there's actually a hanging bar in this, which we haven't done in this. So it's not just poles in between the pieces, but there are poles in between along the edges, and actually there's a kind of a thin bar that runs across all of those. So its standing pieces will be 20, and they're brass guide rods, which is their 20. So there are 20 pieces standing up, and there are 20 pieces that actually will join one to another, which actually this hangs from. So that it's kind of
whereas the cross beam basically.
Yeah, the cross beam between
so
them.
But this is hanging from the cross beam.
Yeah.
And it goes around the back of some of the poles, and then.
Well, some of the poles at the join points, there's some loops. Remember, so it can go through the loops at that point.
And the other one it will go around the back.
And the other ones it will kind of hold it in tension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a little bit like a windbreak, like you take to the beach.
Yeah. And so working in that kind of way, where unlike the central one, which is all held under tension, because actually you've got, but that's held under tension because you've got the weight just pushing out slightly, whereas here you haven't got that, so you need more poles.
So I don't think there's much tension, because the thing that we haven't modelled in this is there were supposed to be 40 silver connectors, and we've only used 20, because the other 20 were these ones that kind of came up here and connected there somewhere, which kind of take the strain of the arch shape of the rib.
So it doesn't. There's not a huge amount pushing out, but I think that my guess is there would be some. There'll be a bit, because it won't be perfect, and there's certain guesses as to how those kind of connectors are put in place. Therefore, how much of that outward pressure they take. But fundamentally, you get the idea that we need more posts to pin out this one than we need for the internal one, and we need a top layer, a guide rod that runs between them. So we've got posts going down, we've got guide rods between them, which allow a certain amount of kind of creating hangings for the curtains, and which is what they're referred to, in fact. Likewise, for the north side length, there should be hangings 100 cubits long, and it's standing piece 20 and their guide rods 20, and the hooks of the standing pieces and their connecting rails of silver. So have I made a mistake there?
No, I was going to say, should we measure it, but I think that'll be the next.
That's right. And then final verses for the breadth of the enclosure, and this is again one of the funny things. If you normally look, you see that the the courtyard is twice as long as it is wide. But actually, it's always said, because I've always wondered why on earth they got this, because it's for the breadth of the enclosure on the west side shall be hangings of 50 cubits. So in other words, it's 50 cubits to the west. And their standing piece is 10. And oh, sorry, hang on, no, I've got the wrong thing here. It's getting to that time of the night where I'm... Yeah, so okay, so east and west, you've got your east and west. So it refers to it as 10 in total, but then it also refers to two sets of 50. Oh, yeah, okay. But it's really just kind of, I guess it's what it's saying is from your point of origin, or to the point of origin, you got 50 from the centre, but
Each hemisphere.
Yeah.
each hemisphere is 50.
Yeah.
And 100 in total.
Yeah.
So in other words, yes, you end to end you've got 100, but if you were to kind of say what's the bit coming out this way, so yeah, that's also that's 50. So you've got effectively 50 in all directions. Which does kind of describe a circle quite nicely.
So shall I measure it with my tape measure?
Measure of the diameter of the finished courtyard. There we go. So we do that.
Okay. So
There's actually a piece of string, it says in the pack there. We haven't done that yet.
I've not made my piece of string yet.
But
Okay, so I don't know.
so 105 centimetres is equivalent
Yeah, so
to 100 cubits.
if I put my finger here and then bring it right up to the camera. I don't know if you can see that, but that is 105.
Yeah. So 105,
which is our equivalent, because we have a cubit. 1 cubit is
10.5
centimetres.
Yeah.
So 100 cubits is 105 centimetres. So, yeah.
So we've been consistent with the dimensions described in the Bible. Not every part was described with lengths, but some were, and we fixed some of those at the beginning, and at the end we end up with something that matches the dimensions at the end. And that's not arbitrary, because unlike with the traditional model where the outside is just made as big as you want it to be, ours has actually kind of been shaped by the way that we've understood the thing to be put together in the first place. There are some extra little bits. There's a kind of a park gate enclosure. The hangings on the one flange of the gate should be 15, because obviously we haven't described how you get in. We've said you've got fasteners which allow you to get some, but actually there's some structures and some other bits. So they're there for completeness. I think we won't necessarily try and do them right now. And their guide rods 3, and the other flange will be hangings of 15 cubits and so on. But these are basically your ways of getting in. The gate of the enclosure shall be a screen of 20 cubits of blue, purple and scarlet. So it's that fine woven, so probably linen. The work of an embroiderer. And their standing pieces are 4 and their guide rods 4. And again, it's the words for standing pieces, which implies that something to do with the doorways are kind of probably buried into the ground. It's my understanding of that word, which is different from just the poles and bars, which kind of fit together and freestand. These ones probably go in a little bit. And all the standing pieces of the enclosure around should be connected with silver, with hooks of silver and guide rods of brass, which are ways of saying you've got things to attach and make sure that the hanging kind of how loose it is, that's anybody's guess. We can't tell. It's a fine little thing. Yeah, I think it's got the word pins in there, has it? Oh, I haven't got it on there. So to complete it, and actually you've shown it on that picture, haven't you? There.
Yeah, a little gate.
There's a little gate basically, which is a kind of nice, and actually within that little gate, which in this model, what it turns out is that's probably where the altar is, where the burnt offering is, and the of course the laver actually sits right against the surface, is right at the entrance of the main tent, which means you go through blood and you go through water to get into what looks like a big heart at the middle, which I always think is very nice. That's why I liked it so much. And then, as I say, we need to actually put the outer covering. Those which we read about at the beginning, ram skin dyed red, and a covering layer above that of badger skin. Well, now it makes sense, because look, you see at the top, we have a separate kind of little disc, So you kind of create an outside rim, and then you've got another one. And as Andrew Hoy points out, you can probably imagine various systems whereby actually you can kind of use the... Yeah, nothing fancy. You could probably imagine scenarios where you can use ways of kind of unhooking the top and creating little bits of ventilation. But generally, there is far better ventilation in this all round, because there are various kind of little gaps and spaces. So when your lamp is burning, the roof is much higher above it than it is in the traditional one, so you're not getting stains on the ceiling. So yeah, cut and stick to fit. And that was the last slide.
Well, let them just get a picture of, at least to get a feel.
Yeah, there we go. Look at that. That's what a wonderful. In fact, I should take a photo. Oh, Howard, you're going to go for that one.
I'm crumpled on my sides on it. Again,
Here's one I made earlier. It may not look. It may not. So I think we've probably done the technical bits. We've done it in quite a rush. But actually it's quite useful from a timing point of view, because we've got to work with quite tight, although we've got longer on Saturday, we've got various sections with things to get in, so it's very useful to have done this and seeing actually how long does it take to do. And it's also useful because this is the first time that we've tried to actually run through the various PowerPoint slides that we've been working on separately and then blending together. So thanks very much for doing that, and anyone who's stuck right to the end to see our fantastic creation, thank you for being with us. I often do ask. I'm very deliberate in critiquing everything I try and do, and I often ask myself, why do I bother doing this? My question: why did we bother doing this? Which has been far more work than I thought it was going to be when we set out. But actually, it is satisfying to know. And if you stop and you kind of think of it from an apologetic point of view, that you have an ancient text which most people think was made up after the event, and if you do want to take and stick with the old model, that's fine. But you've got to admit it kind of requires all sorts of extra bits in there, and it doesn't really make. There's lots of kind of question marks in it, and that's fine. You just take it on faith. You know, the Lord set it up that way. But actually, as we've gone through it, we've actually created something that is surprisingly technical, in terms of the way that weight leans into each other. One piece kind of creates tension and all of those sorts of things, and there's nothing that's actually described here in the text. Every single part that's in the text has a point to it. I mean, it all has a reason for being there, which isn't something you can say naturally of the traditional model. I'm trying to be kind, because people often have made up reasons, but they're often reasons that are put in on after the event, you know. So that the prayer is secret. See, we can't see the prayer anymore, so that's why it's like that kind of thing, which has always felt a little bit artificial, if you know what I mean. So from an apologetic point of view, to suddenly see something that and of course, as we'll probably highlight more on Saturday, you can show pictures of modern yurts and so on, that actually is not that dissimilar from the way that people still build large tents in nomadic communities. And actually the nice thing with this is as well, all of the parts are, which we haven't really touched on, none of the parts are overly heavy, whereas in the older models, the bases all weigh a ton, the big silver bases that you have to hold things up. So just one person carrying one of those is quite a weight. And the enormous boards, which are 1.5 cubits wide, 15 cubits high, and we don't know quite how thick, but they're thick enough to get a big pole through, if we're not going to add extra metal on the outside. Well, one, where do you get them, and two, how many Levites does it take to carry those at any distance when you're moving things around? Whereas this is actually much more manageable in size. You can imagine things like the long poles being kind of banded together and rolled up in the curtains, you know, if that's not too dishonouring for them, all that kind of that sort of approach, because the sizes are the same. And so when we see all of those things, I find it's very satisfying from an apologetic point of view. It kind of makes you say, yeah, I can see that. I can see how, and you actually, there's a job to explain now. So if you want to say that the Exodus was a made-up story hundreds of years later, how come whoever wrote it wrote something that's so mind-numbingly technical when you try and read it, but actually when you visualize it and you physically build it, actually works and creates something that works? Why bother going to that level of detail. Half the book of Exodus is spent describing how to build this thing. And we've done it in 2 chapters, but there's a whole load of bits on the extra accoutrements and how you use it and so on. So so that's I guess so there is that's my kind of justification for why we spent a lot of time and money putting together playing around with these things. But anyway, Howard or Josh, did you want to make any comment or say anything? Because I've done a lot of talking for the camera.
It's very interesting, very compelling. Once I've seen the ribs laid out, I just want to get the thing constructed. And now I can see straight away how it's going to work.
Yeah.
It's an umbrella.
Yeah.
Basically, and you put it up, it holds under tension. The crotch or the gusset or whatever you like to call it,
the groin vault.
The groin vault, whatever it is. Well, you've seen how an umbrella works. The springy bits go into their own little groin sockets.
Yeah.
The top's the same. But so yes, it makes perfect sense, and I like to take scripture very seriously. If it says that many fasteners, that's how many fasteners there are.
Yeah.
And so it depends on your view of scripture.
Yeah.
If you fudge scripture,
then
you're happy with fudging extra things in. But I think the Lord says things for a reason, and He lists out these items exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, when you see it work like this, as it says it does what it says on the tin, or it says in the book.
I go with you totally on that.
It basically it deepens your love and faith in, shall we say, or appreciation of God's word, and how that's So to watch it come together, and obviously there's going to be a lot more. I mean, David Hoy is obviously doing he's taken it to an nth degree now, I suppose. So.
And well, I think what in doing what we're doing, it shows why what we need to do now is you need to get various people approaching it. Because as I said, when we're doing the middle bit, we're saying, well, we could imagine different ways you could interpret this. We're trying to reflect something in what we're doing that we see in the text. But actually, there's probably going to be there'll probably be 100 different detail ways. And actually, if the more people do it, the more they can. Because if someone comes up and says we've got a better solution for this middle bit, I'm happy with that. But it feels fundamentally like the basis is there.
The logical extension, or the logical process is to end up making an entire full scale tabernacle out of in the same way, and then I suppose that those bits will be in.
Yes, that's right. Because you say
it'll take a lot of time, a lot of money. But it'd be great.
Well, that's actually what his website Project 314 is about. He's trying to raise interest to raise the money to actually build a full scale physical one using the exact right materials. And but as you do that kind of thing, there'll be theories that get tested, but it doesn't feel like it will be hugely different.
Well, if you've got all the component parts.
It's more to do with the shape of the parts and perhaps how you.
Absolutely, because when you actually try prototype 1, that doesn't quite work. We have to change the
shape of the hands. That's exactly what I mean. Yeah,
they wobble too much, so we need to just carve it in a different way so they're actually more snug, or perhaps they need a bit more. Yeah,
or we find that the idea of putting just a single pin through, it has to be certain thickness, otherwise it shears. And so that means we've used a bit more of the silver, so we haven't got as much for this. So it's all those little bits.
But what we're talking about is refinement.
They're refinement things, rather than the
refinements, but still staying within within the listed number of items.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So anyway, So how do we finish tonight?
We'll draw it to a close.
We'll draw it to close. We'll say for those of you that stuck with us right to the end and saw our wonderful model, thank you for that. It wasn't quite the teaching kind of event we normally do, but a lot of people have asked to see something along these lines, so you can't blame me. You've now seen it. And Howard's actually had an opportunity to kind of play with it, and will go away with great certainty in his heart.
I'll get a C- for my Levite, so group exercise.
Yeah, that's right. Don't apply for a job when they do build the third temple.
No, I think I'll just be an observer.
Yeah, be an observer when that comes. Yeah. So okay, we'll stop streaming now. So to say goodbye, it's been good to be able to do this. It's been really useful probably for me and Anne, because we'll be a lot smarter on this when it comes to Saturday. Well, I'm saying that word a lot with confidence. We'll be a bit. We'll be a bit slicker when it comes to it. Good. Good night. Okay, good night. So we stop.